video. Hope you enjoy episode 1. Let me know how it was.
There is a quiet, almost sacred dignity in stone. Wood rots, bowing under the weight of damp seasons, frost, and boring insects. Iron rusts, flaking away into useless red dust when kissed by the salt of the wind. Mortar crumbles, returning to the sand from which it was mixed. But a well-laid block of granite remains.
My name is Gideon Stone. For 12 years, I worked as a master mason in the real world, building foundations, laying brickwork, and repairing what time sought to tear down. I was 29 years old, a man of simple habits, quiet thoughts, and strong, calloused hands.
He didn't care for the modern, cheap ways of building. He believed in creating structures that would outlast generations. His final job was a historic chimney on the old Miller estate, a towering column of Victorian brickwork that had begun to lean under the weight of decades.
The mortar had turned to chalky sand, and the dark red bricks were loose, rattling in the high winds like old teeth. It was a routine job, but it was high up, requiring a temporary wooden scaffold anchored against the steep slate roof.
The wind was howling on the morning of the accident, whipping across the slate roof tiles with a sharp, biting chill. Up on the scaffold, the world felt distant and small, covered in a blanket of gray morning mist. Gideon was applying a fresh layer of lime mortar, his metal trowel scraping rhythmically.
It was a familiar, comforting sound, a steady scrape-scrape-slap that had defined my working life. I was focused, checking the plumb line to ensure the chimney was straight. I had no idea this would be the final time my boots touched the scaffolding of my home world.
Without warning, the wood groaned beneath his boots. A rotten diagonal support brace, hidden deep within the scaffold structure where water had pooled and decayed the pine over many years, snapped with the sudden, deafening crack of a rifle shot. The platform tilted violently.
Gravity instantly claimed my weight. I lunged forward, my arms outstretched, trying to grab the rough brickwork of the chimney to save myself, but the loose bricks gave way under my grip, pulling free from their century-old beds. The sky rushed up to meet my eyes in a dizzying whirl of blue and gray. I remember the weightless sensation in my stomach, the roar of the wind whipping past my face, and the sudden, terrifying realization of my own mortality. There was no time to scream, no time to pray.
Just a brief, quiet thought of regret for the things left undone, for the projects left unfinished. And then, a sudden, absolute darkness swallowed the wind, the sky, the cold, and his very thoughts. Consciousness returned slowly, like a stone rising from the bottom of a deep, silent lake. There was no pain, no shattered bones, and no broken ribs of a terminal fall. Instead, there was only the smell of damp earth, rich compost, and crushed pine needles.
I woke up and sat up quickly, gasping for air, my hand grasping at my chest. I expected blood and agony, but I felt completely whole. I looked down at my hands. They were younger, free of the deep scars and embedded mortar dust of a decade of hard labor.
The air was thick, clean, and carried a strange, vibrant energy that made his lungs tingle with every breath. He stood up on shaky legs, realizing his body felt lighter, younger, and filled with a quiet, dormant power. He was in a forest of titans.
Towering trees, their trunks as wide as houses, stretched hundreds of feet into the sky. There were no roads, no power lines, no distant hum of highways. The world was ancient, wild, and completely devoid of human presence. I was alive, reincarnated, and entirely alone.
Gideon spent hours wandering the primeval woods, trying to find a river, a path, or any sign of civilization. The silence was deafening, broken only by the rustle of leaves. As the afternoon waned, the sky turned a dark, bruised purple.
Thunder rumbled in the distance, a low, ominous vibration. The air grew heavy with the promise of a storm. I needed shelter, and fast. The forest floor was no place to spend a stormy night in an unknown wilderness, especially with the strange, predatory sound starting to echo.
Eventually, the dense foliage thinned, giving way to a sheer, vertical granite cliff face that rose up into the mist. It was a colossal wall of solid gray stone, weathered by eons of rain but still standing firm and unyielding.
I approached the massive rock, exhausted and shivering as the first cold drops of rain began to fall. Even in this strange world, stone was stone. It was the only thing I knew, the only constant. I pressed my hands against the rough, cold granite surface.
As Gideon's palms made contact with the cold granite, a sudden warmth ignited in the center of his chest. It wasn't painful, it felt like a dormant muscle suddenly flexing for the first time. The warmth rushed down his arms and pooled in his palms.
The energy flowed from me directly into the mountain. The solid granite began to soften. Under my touch, the stone lost its rigidity, turning fluid and malleable like warm clay. I gasped, pulling my hands back in shock.
The stone retained the shape of his fingers, frozen in a smooth, wave-like pattern. Gideon stared in absolute disbelief, his heart hammering in his chest. He pressed his hand back into the rock, and it yielded again, moving with the ease of wet sand.
The mountain was responding to my will. It wasn't just magic, it was a direct connection to the very element I had spent my entire life working with. The earth wasn't a cold, dead thing, it was listening, and it was ready to be shaped.
Gideon stepped back and took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He looked at a large, jagged boulder sitting near the base of the cliff, a rough piece of rock that had fallen from the heights long ago. He decided to test the limits of this power.
I focused my mind, imagining a perfect, square block, the kind of granite ashlar I used to spend hours carving with a heavy steel hammer and cold chisels. I reached out with my thoughts, extending the warm energy from my hands, and pushed.
The golden light flared, enveloping the boulder. The rough, jagged edges dissolved, the excess stone sliding off like water, leaving a perfectly squared, beautifully smooth block of granite hovering slightly above the ground before settling into the dirt.
A clean, master-cut stone, created in a heartbeat, with corners so sharp they could cut paper. I laughed, a breathless sound that echoed in the quiet forest. I didn't need tools anymore. My magic was my trowel, my chisel, and my crane.
He realized that his 12 years of hard labor in his past life hadn't been wasted. His knowledge of structural engineering, of how stone behaves under pressure and stress, was the perfect catalyst for this power. He was prepared to be the ultimate builder.
In my previous life, I had to fight the stone, using brute force and heavy tools to shape it. Here, the stone is an extension of my own body. The storm is breaking out now, the rain is starting to pour. It's time to build a real shelter.
The storm broke, rain lashing down in heavy sheets, stripping leaves from the giant trees and turning the forest floor into a muddy torrent. Gideon turned back to the sheer cliff face. Pushing his hands forward, he willed the granite to part.
I willed the stone to flow outward, forming a wide, arched opening. I walked forward, pushing the stone back further and further, hollowing out a room directly out of the mountain's heart. I didn't just dig a crude hole, I engineered a proper dwelling.
The stone liquefied and flowed under his command, splitting and shifting seamlessly. Gideon willed the ceiling to form a perfect Roman arch, distributing the weight of the massive mountain peaks above down into thick, sturdy pillars of living stone.
I knew the math. A flat ceiling would collapse under this load, but an arch would direct the force downward. I carved out shelving and small alcoves into the walls, shaping them with clean, modern lines. Every surface became smooth and polished.
He didn't stop at structural arches. Gideon sloped the entrance floor slightly outward so that any rainwater would drain away naturally, keeping the interior completely dry. Within minutes, he had carved a structurally flawless sanctuary out of solid granite.
It was a masterpiece of architectural magic, built without a single drop of sweat. I stood inside my new dry shelter, looking out at the howling wind and pounding rain. They felt distant and powerless against 200 feet of solid granite.
Gideon sat on a smooth stone bench he had molded directly out of the floor, feeling the solid comfort of the granite. The cave was secure, but it was empty. He needed warmth and a way to cook. He focused his magic on the corner of the room.
With a wave of my hand, I willed a stone hearth to rise from the floor, complete with a clean chimney flue. But a chimney is useless if it doesn't vent outside. I had to project my magic upward through the solid rock.
Gideon willed a narrow, vertical shaft to rise from the top of the fireplace, carving a clean, circular pipe through 200 feet of solid granite. He guided the magic to bend the shaft slightly to prevent rain from falling directly onto the fire.
I added small, horizontal baffles inside the shaft to create a natural draft. I could feel the magic drilling through the stone, rising higher and higher until it punctured the surface of the cliff top, venting out into the forest air.
Smoke began to rise from the high cliff top, drifting away into the stormy sky. Inside, the natural draft pulled fresh air into the cave, preventing any carbon monoxide or smoke from pooling in the living chambers. Gideon gathered dry wood from near the entrance.
I willed a massive, sliding stone door to form at the cave entrance. It slides smoothly along a groove carved into the floor, allowing me to completely seal the room from the raging storm and any predators outside. Now I am fully secure.
The stone door slid shut with a deep, satisfying thud, sealing Gideon in complete safety. He set down the bundle of dry firewood he had managed to gather just before the storm intensified, placing it near the hearth.
I started a small fire, watching the warm orange flames dance against the smooth, light-reflective granite walls. The cave is incredibly quiet now that the door is shut. The howling wind outside has been reduced to a distant, gentle whisper.
The dry cave was warm and secure. While exploring the back of the chamber, Gideon detected another resource. Using his deep stone senses, he felt a faint, rhythmic vibration of flowing water behind the solid granite.
It was the sound of a subterranean spring running through a crack in the rock just 10 feet away. I focused my energy, carving a narrow, smooth channel through the granite to redirect a small portion of the flow into my living chamber.
The spring water flowed through the channel, emptying into a large, polished basin Gideon carved directly out of the side wall. He designed an overflow groove running under the door to drain excess water out of the cliff.
The water is ice cold, crystal clear, and tastes of pure mountain minerals. Having an endless supply of fresh running water inside my shelter is an incredible luxury. I don't even have to step outside to drink.
Gideon sat at his stone dining table, eating some wild berries he had collected earlier in the day. The simple meal felt incredibly satisfying in the warmth of the fire.
These berries are sweet, with a slightly tart, wild flavor. They are the only food I have for now, but they will keep my strength up. Tomorrow, I will need to search the valley for more substantial resources and wild grains.
As night fell, the storm outside peaked. Deep, echoing roars of primitive predators rumbled through the forest canopy, vibrating through the massive trees. Gideon listened to the wild noises of the primeval valley.
There are monsters in this forest, massive beasts that rule the night. I can hear their cries echoing in the wind. In the open forest floor, would have been prey. But inside this mountain, I am completely safe.
The massive sliding stone door and the thick granite walls completely muffled the sounds of the wilderness. Inside, the fire crackled softly, keeping the dampness of the storm at bay.
I feel a profound sense of security. Stone is the ultimate shield. It doesn't yield, it doesn't decay, and it doesn't let the threats of the outside world cross its boundary. This is my fortress.
Gideon sat cross-legged by the hearth, meditating and focusing the magic in his chest. He could feel the energy circulating through his body, expanding his capacity and refining his control.
The magic is settling, becoming more stable. It responds to my thoughts with incredible speed. I need to train my mind to handle larger volumes of energy so I can build the terraces and roads I have planned.
He planned his next steps. The cave was a perfect shelter, but it was only the foundation of what he envisioned. The hidden valley had immense potential for a city.
I will survey the valley's mineral resources, locate clay and sandstone, and open a proper stone quarry. Once I have the materials, I will build the retaining walls and pave the roads. The structure is already in my head.
As the fire died down to warm embers, Gideon lay down on his stone bed frame, pulling his hooded travel cloak over himself. The moss and pine boughs he had arranged were soft and comfortable.
I went to sleep listening to the quiet crackle of the embers. I am no longer a simple mason on earth, I am a builder in a world of magic. Tomorrow, the real work begins. I will carve my mark into this land.
The storm finally passed, leaving behind a clear starry sky over the mountains. The quiet valley stood waiting, a sleeping giant ready to be awakened by the hands of a master mason.
This is my canvas, and I will build an empire that will stand for 1,000 years. Let the future come.